Hello, Eric Dorward here with the Spartan Rocketry Club again, and we are going to be continuing our build of the Estes Blue Origin New Shepard. We are to the point where we're basically going to be finishing up the build construction-wise. The finishing is going to be time-consuming as usual, but the build is more or less done. The major thing we need to do in this section is we need to put the motor mount in, and then there are some small pieces that need to get attached. Remember, the motor mount, it's not completely attached thoroughly, but I have it like this because this is going to end up going in here like this, and the final construction ought to have uh, this little bit sticking out the back, and we have then the motor retention system that's going to go over top of that. This is plastic, so it's going to have to get crazy glued in, but we're going to use it right now to get the spacing right, because if I don't have this in, if I glue it wrong like this, there's no retention system. That'd be bad. So we're going to use this mostly for just alignment purposes. Now, the instructions say that we need to put some glue inside the body tube at a couple different spots, approximately 2 inches, and then a 1/4 inch inside. The 1/4 inch, I'm just going to use the glue bottle directly to do that, but the other one, I'm going to have to brush the glue on. I suspect this is not enough glue, uh, but that's fine. 2 inches, I'm not going to measure it. I'm just going to eyeball it because I've done this many times. It's probably, it's about this far. And if you are doing this for the first time, then by all means, you might want to measure a line on your dowel that you're using to apply the glue, and that'll help you make sure it's in far enough. All we really want to do is make sure that the far part of the engine mount is in the glue. So it doesn't need to be perfect, and we're not going to use like the 2 inches to tell us precisely where to put the motor mount anyway. So I have painted the glue inside. Now I'm going to apply glue, and again, I'm not going to put it right at the edge. It says a 1/4 inch. A little dribble there, and that's because it's when it fits in, there's going to be approximately a 1/4 inch. You can see right here this 1/4 inch of plastic, and then the engine mount. So I'm going to kind of eyeball about that distance. Probably you know, I would like to get it as close to a 1/4 inch as possible. So I'm doing my best as I use the glue here to get it approximately the width of this seam here. That looks pretty good. I don't actually need to brush this out because I used the nozzle kind of like a brush. So this should be pretty good. Now I'm going to put my finger down the motor here, or the engine retainer. No, motor mount. There we go. To get good control of it so I don't push it in too far or not far enough. And it goes, this is actually a pretty loose fit as I'm putting it in, and you should probably test fit this first. There we go. Now, I don't want the plastic part on, um, but I need to get it off carefully without moving the engine engine mount. I suppose I could just let this dry in place, but I don't feel too comfortable about that. The plastic and the glue aren't going to stick together, but I'd still rather not risk it. So I'm going to try to spin this off without messing with the motor mount. There we go. So that's pretty good. Under normal circumstances, I would want to put a fillet of glue around the motor mount. But since this needs to fit snugly on, that's not the world's greatest plan. What I am going to do, however, is I'm going to let the glue there dry a bit, because the next step in the instruction is I need some crazy glue, some CA glue, and I need to paint rather, whatever you want to do with it. I need to apply it on the inside of the tube here, and then this is going to go over the top. But the last thing I want to do is try to push this down and have it catch on the motor mount, this part here, and whoop, it's still very wet, and I don't want to have it jostle around. So, in fact, I kind of jostled it there, so I need to make sure that this still fits right. So I'm going to put it back on, and I'm going to, you can see I moved it pretty far. That would be bad. So I'm going to put it back on and make sure that it is in the right place, because otherwise I've kind of ruined the whole thing. So back on it goes, and I'm going to pull, pull this back out so that it's sticking out the proper distance. There we go. So I think what I'm going to do again is I'm screwing this up as I talk about it. I'm just going to unscrew this and let it dry. Now, while I'm letting that dry a little bit, there are a couple other things. So there are a couple little pieces of balsa here. These are just very small shapes. These are going to go like this, where the strafe that we glued on is going to kind of attach over the plastic. These need to be crazy glued in place, but I'm not going to attempt that until everything's all set. The other kind of odd thing is this, so that this is one end. This is like the rear end. The front end of this is also going to get little pieces. And those little pieces, if you read the instructions carefully, and it's always a good idea to read through the whole thing before you start doing stuff. The front end little tiny pieces, they attach directly to the nose cone. They attach in here. Now, under normal circumstances, that wouldn't really matter. We just crazy glue them in place, and it is what it is. But the problem with this is the little pieces need to fit in there. They have to be white. If they're wood colored, this is going to look terrible. So they have to be painted before we attach this. And they are exceedingly small. They're about this size. So painting them individually is just unpleasant. So what I did was I cut everything else out of the balsa sheet except for these little pieces, and you can see them here. And I just painted the sheet white. Now, I only used primer. I could probably painted it with 2 coats of primer and then the actual like gloss white that I'm going to use. But I also need to be able to paint the edge of it, which I can't do when it's still in the sheet. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to hand paint some white paint over the top of these things once, after I glue them in place. So at this point, I need to cut these out because they're basically ready. And, since I'm waiting for the glue to dry anyway, no real waste there. Now, since I've painted over top of the crack, this could potentially be a little difficult to see where I need to cut. And it feels kind of gummy as I'm cutting through it because even though this is dried for several days, it doesn't feel like just cutting through balsa. Because I'm not just cutting through balsa, I'm cutting through some paint on the top as well. So what I'm going to try to do here is I'm going to cut just where I see the places where the wood is still attached. And I'm just going to be very careful about that because the last thing I want to do is break one of these tiny, tiny little pieces. And I'm going to cut through both sides just to make sure that I'm not damaging anything. I'm not going to try to push them out either, not until I've done a good job of cutting my way through here. I can actually see a little bit better on this side where the attachment points were. So there they go. They are largely cut out at this point, but yeah, I'm going to make sure I cut these very carefully. In any event, oh yeah, well, that one's really hard to see because I painted pretty well over it. But yeah, at this point, I'm going to have to get like a flashlight out to really stare that one down to make sure that I don't miss anything. The rest of them weren't too bad, but that side in particular, oh boy, that is hard to see. So, in any event, I'm going to let the glue dry a little bit more. I'm going to cut the rest of these out carefully, and then we will pick it up in the construction from there. So I'll see you shortly. All right, so the glue appears to be set, and I've tested that by just kind of pushing on the motor mount here, and it seems like it's in pretty well. So this is, remember, going to go down, and then I'm going to push it carefully into place. I'm going to just test this once to make sure that I haven't done anything dumb. So there we go. That looks good. Now, this requires our crazy glue, our CA glue at this point, because otherwise the plastic is not going to bond. with anything else. And this stuff is pretty well frozen in place. That's super fun. I don't think I've ever had this happen before. I seem to have crazy glued the the bottle shut. Well, that's fun. I need to fix that. So sorry, but give me a moment here, please. Oh, that's not happened to me before, but yes, I got the glue open. Who knew that you could glue the cap shut with crazy glue? I suppose I should have been aware of that, but whatever. So anyway, on goes the crazy glue. Now, this is not something to be trifled with if you have not used crazy glue before. It sets really quickly and it bonds pretty much everything together. So right now, I am just painting the tiniest little bit in here. If you are not a grown up, you should probably not be using this stuff. And if you are a grown up, you should be careful about using this stuff. All right, so we only get really one chance of getting this thing in here. So I need it to go down and where it's supposed to be, like right away. So let's not mess around with this stuff. I'm just being very careful because the last thing I want to do here is glue it not the whole way down because that would ruin the build. And I'm getting kind of nervous about this actually because it's not moving as smoothly down as I would like for a variety of reasons. So what I'm actually going to do is, instead of run the risk of this getting stuck, because again, this is one of those things that if you screw it up, it is not fixable because I need to have the motor part sticking out so I can get the retainer on. I'm actually going to let that dry and I'm going to attempt this again, but I think I'm going to sand it down first because I don't feel good about that. But in the meantime, what I can do, oh, let me give it a test fit again. Yeah, see, it's not attaching as smoothly as I would like, and the glue is more or less, it's really, well, it's not quite dry, but it has lost a lot of its adhesive power. So that just needs to wait for a little bit. And you know what? This is a good lesson. It is better to be safe than sorry. Test fit everything. I mean, I did, but adding the glue changed the calculus here that we're doing. Anyway, so we'll deal with that a little bit. I did cut out these little pieces, and they're going to go in like this. Now, and you can tell they're white, and the edges are not. So I'm going to hand paint this at some point, at least the edge. Now, what we can do is it's going to end up going on like this. So they need to be lined up with the streaks. And we can do that now. That also requires crazy glue, of course, because pretty much everything that we're going to be doing at this point that doesn't involve just wood on wood gluing anymore. So this requires crazy glue as well. So we are going to carefully line this up, and we're only going to put glue like on this little bit right here. And it's going to go in and it's going to line up and we're going to be happy about it. Now, just looking at the directions, there are 4 of them, so it's going to be roughly in 4 spots. I don't think there's any like preferential place to put it. So we will not worry about trying to line anything up super well there. And again, I'm just going to put a little bit of glue kind of on this bumpy side right here. That should be all that we really need to hold it. So in it goes, and I'm lining it up with the straight. And I'm trying not to move the body since they're not actually attached. And there we go. That looks pretty good. Very nice. Okay. Still detaches. That's great. And it doesn't rotate too well because if you recall, some of those pieces were a little long. So, yeah, I need to be careful about that. I'm going to probably have to sand down this edge before I do too much else. But it is essentially in the right place, and the rest of them I will attach basically with the same technique, but you don't need to watch all that. I am going to deal with this end and get this attached. I guess off camera, you probably don't need to watch that, but seriously, this is the trickiest, most important part, so I want to do that very carefully. that's about as far as we're going to get in this video. So after that, there's not a whole lot else to do other than finishing it. So I'll probably do the wood fill and my sanding sealer and the priming between now and the next video. The last little bit will be decals and that kind of thing. So thanks for watching. I will see you in the next part.